أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف المرسلين وعلى صحبه أجمعين ومن اتبع لسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته يا أيها الإخوة والأخوات. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I hope you're in a good state of health. I greet you with the greeting of Islam, which is to say, may the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon you. After that, inshallah, we send peace and blessings upon his messenger Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, the last of the messengers, the seal of the prophets. And we send peace and blessings upon his companions. We send peace and blessings upon his family and his wives and upon all those who follow them and follow him in righteous guidance until the day of judgment. Amma ba'd, now as to what proceeds, inshallah, we continue with our lessons of Mukhtasar al-Akhdari, the abridgement of Imam al-Akhdari with respects to morals, with respects to purification, and with respects to prayer. We're still in the various sections that deal with purification. In the last section, he had told us what the recommended acts of wudu are. And he had said it was the saying of the Bismillah, it was the using of the siwak, it was using or washing the limbs 2 or 3 times, and it was also preferring the right side, meaning beginning with the right side. It was also beginning with the front of the head when wiping the head, and it's also to maintain the order between the sunnahs, and it's also to reduce the amount of water that you use, to minimize the amount of water that you use when you make wudu. And he had also said that when you're making wudu, that it's wajib that you rub in between your fingers. The water not only has to reach there, but your finger has to touch it. But when it comes to your feet, when you're making wudu, the water only has to reach there. You don't have to rub in between them, except when you're doing ghusl. And as you'll learn later, that in ghusl you have to rub every part of your body that is external. And he also said that when a person has a large beard, that it's wajib, it's obligatory for that person to just touch the outside when he's making wudu. But if he has a light beard such that you can see the skin, or he can touch the skin easily, then he has to make sure the water penetrates down to the skin. But in the case of someone making a ghusl, which is a ritual bath, then the person has to ensure that the water gets down to their very skin, whether they have a beard, a large beard, or a light beard. So today, inshallah, we'll continue Faslun fi Nawaqid al-Wudu'. He says this is the section on Nawaqid al-Wudu', the nullifiers of wudu. He says, Nawaqid al-Wudu' ahdathun wa asbabun. He says there are ahdathun, meaning they are things that are filthy, hadath. They're events that occur, ahdath, and wa asbab, and they are means. What he means by this, there's ahdath, there are events that as soon as they occur, it results in a person losing his wudu. What he means by asbab means these are things that in of themselves, they're not the reason why the wudu is nullified, but they put a person into a state of mind where he has no idea what he's doing, and there's a very high likelihood that he lost his wudu during it. So therefore, when a person gets into that state, it is incumbent upon them to make wudu. So ahdath are events, and asbab are means. So he says, fil ahdath. Now, with relation to the events that occur for a person to lose his wudu, he says al-bawl, first and foremost, is urinating. If a person goes to urinate, then their wudu is nullified immediately. Wal-gha'it, he says also to defecate. When a person goes to take number 2, your wudu is automatically nullified. Wal-rihu, and blowing wind, passing wind, that automatically nullifies the person's wudu as well. Well, madhu is what is basically pre-ejaculation. It's basically, as he'll explain later, it's the fluid that comes out when a person gets excited, sexually excited, from looking or touching, but it's not sperm. You understand? He says when that happens, that breaks your wudu as well. Well, wadyu, and wadyu is basically prosthetic fluid, that when some people, when they urinate, it comes out at the end of it, and some people, even when they don't urinate, it comes out. It doesn't really happen to many people, but it exists, and that breaks wudu as well. You understand? He says, well, asbab. Now, as for the means that break a person's wudu, there's several. He says, an-nawm al-thaqil. He says it's heavy sleep, whether it's long or whether it's short. If you are in such a sleep that you're not aware of what's going on around you, then your wudu is automatically nullified. If you sleep and it's light, even if you sleep a light sleep for 3 hours, but you know what's going on around you, then your wudu is not nullified. Some of the scholars, they say that the criteria, just to give you an idea of what a light sleep is or a heavy sleep is, some of them, they say that it's when you have a pen or a tasbih or something in your hand, and that if it falls out of your hand, you're not aware of it, then you are in a heavy sleep. Others, they say, is that if someone were to be making noise around you, having a conversation around you, you don't hear what they're saying, then you're in a heavy sleep. You understand? But to be on the safer side, it's better to consider every sleep a heavy sleep. Nonetheless, pretty much people are aware of when they sleep, when they're aware of themselves and when they're not aware of themselves. Sometimes you can doze off and you know exactly what's going on around you, but you're just taking that light sleep. But the heavy sleep is what nullifies the wudu. He says, well, irma'u is to lose consciousness, to faint. If you faint, you lose consciousness, then you know your wudu is automatically nullified. He says, well, sukr is to be drunk or intoxicated or high. If that happens, your wudu is nullified as well. Well, junoon, and to go insane. If you lose your mind, your wudu is nullified because you could do anything in that state of mind. Well, qubla, and to kissing someone, kissing a man or a woman with kissing a man or a woman breaks your wudu. He says, well, lamsul mar'ati إذ إن قصد اللذة أو وجدها, and to touch a woman or for a woman to touch a man, إن قصد اللذة, if you intended to pleasure thereby, أو وجدها, or if you find pleasure. For a man, the pleasure is an erection, and for a woman, a pleasure is the fluid that comes out of her private parts. So if one of the members of the opposite sex, they touch the other person of the opposite sex for the very purpose of finding that, whether they find that pleasure or not, their wudu is nullified. If they touch the member of the opposite sex and they get aroused, even if they weren't intending to find pleasure, then their wudu is nullified. But if they were not intending to find pleasure and they don't find pleasure, meaning those two things happen, meaning you're not intending to find pleasure, you touch the person and then you don't find pleasure, then what happens is that your wudu is still intact. But if you are not intending to find the pleasure and you touch the person and you find pleasure, your wudu is nullified. And if you are intending to find the pleasure by touching the person and you don't find the pleasure, your wudu is nullified as well. You understand? He says, وَمَسُّ الذَّكَرِ بِبَاتِنِ الْكَفِّ أَوْ بِبَاتِنِ الْأَصَابِعِ. He says also, what nullifies your wudu as a man is to touch your penis with the inside of your hand or the inside of your fingers. You understand? The inside of your hand, if you grab your penis with that nullifies your wudu. He says, وَمَنْ شَكَّ فِي حَدَثٍ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْوُضُوء. He says, whoever has a doubt with respects to an event occurring, such as urinating or farting or something like that, وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْوُضُوء. He says that wudu is wajib upon him, إِلَّا except أَنْ يَكُونَ مُوَسْوَسًا, except that he's a person that suffers from whisperings, meaning he's an OCD person. Someone that will for no reason go and make wudu 30 times in the bathrooms. فَلَا شَيْءًا عَلَيْهِ. In the case of that person, there's nothing upon him. You understand? Now, وَيَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ غَسْلُ الذَّكَرِ كُلِّهِ مِنَ الْمَذِي. He says when he experiences madhi, what we describe as pre-ejaculation, then he has to wash his entire penis, because there's a likelihood that the fluid it transferred from the tip of his penis to the other part of his penis. He says, وَلَا يَغْسِلُ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, and he doesn't wash his testicles unless somehow that liquid came to his testicles, then he would still have to wash it. He says, وَالْمَذْيُ, he says, madhu is what we call pre-ejaculation. He says, هُوَ الْمَاءُ الْخَارِجُ, he says, the ejaculated liquid that comes out in the shahwati as-sughra, when you have a slight arousal. You understand? بِالتَّفَكُّرِ, by thinking about sexual or sensual pleasures, أو نظر, or you look at a woman that you find beautiful, أو غيره, or something like that. You hear a woman's voice, you get aroused, things of that nature. Madhu is a pre-ejaculation that comes out. It's not full-on sperm, but you can still see the liquid is thin, it's kind of clear, and it has, and it's not as thick as sperm. You understand? Now, and sometimes it can happen to a person and not even aware of it. Now, so inshallah we'll review. He says, Faslun, this is the section on the nullifiers of wudu. He says the nullifiers of wudu are events and means. He says, now as far as the means that break the wudu, They are urinating, they are defecating, they are farting, they are pre-ejaculation sperm, and they are prosthetic fluid that comes out. He said, now as far as the means, they are heavy sleep, they are fainting, meaning losing consciousness, they're intoxication, insanity, kissing, touching a woman or a man if you intend to find pleasure, or if you find pleasure by touching the person. And also to touch your penis with the inside of your hand or with the inside of your fingers. He says that whoever doubts with respects to having a hadith, with respects to an event that would break his wudu, whether it occurred or not, he says, wajaba alayhi al-wudu, that it's obligatory for him to renew his wudu, except if he happens to be a person that suffers from whisperings, that he's OCD, then in that case, there's nothing on him because the deen would become difficult for him. And the way to break OCD is to ignore it. If you comply with your OCD, it'll just keep getting worse. He says it's also wajib upon a person that experiences the pre-ejaculation that he washes his entire penis. He says, but he doesn't wash his entire testicle. But I add to that's if the liquid doesn't get on his testicles, which it normally shouldn't. But if it happens to do that, then he has to wash it off. He says then madhu, he tells you what madhu is. Madhu is the ejaculated fluid that comes out when a person experiences slight arousal by virtue of thinking about the opposite sex or looking at the opposite sex or some other means through which people normally gain arousal. Inshallah, jazakumullah khair ya ikhwan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept this from us. Assalamu alaikum.